"Don't sign that check, homeless man." A harsh, low voice cut through the professional presentation. Paul Martinez, the club's janitor, stood by the table, his hand pointing not at the expensive $15,000 check Kane, the Reaper MC president, was signing, but at the cheap plastic clipboard resting next to it. "That name is fake." Kane looked up, pen hovering over the signature line. He had been meticulously examining the elaborate Veterans Emergency Relief Fund solicitation letter within the Reaper clubhouse, preparing to commit $15,000. A substantial donation intended for an organization that promised emergency housing for homeless veterans. 62-year-old Paul Martinez, a homeless veteran himself and a former Army logistics specialist, recognized the man standing across from Kane. He was a con artist from Denver. What sealed the recognition was an amateurish detail. The word relief was misspelled on the Clipboard logo. That single, jarring error stopped the fraudulent donation seconds before the money vanished. Sometimes the men's society ignores the homeless, possess a unique acuity that sees through the sophisticated scams that credentials so carefully conceal. Sometimes it takes nothing more than a simple spelling error to expose the frauds that expensive charity certificates desperately try to hide. Day 1, Thursday, 2:30 p.m. Reaper MC Clubhouse, Northeast Portland. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of coffee and stale cigarettes, a contrast to the polished veneer of the monthly charity review meeting. Kane, seated at the head of a heavy oak table, was evaluating donation requests and allocating funds from the club's legitimate 501c3 operations. Supporting veteran causes was the core of the club's mission. Kane's accountant had been clear, repeating the warning monthly. President, verify every single charity before donating. The fraud targeting veteran organizations is epidemic across the country. Scammers know you're generous. They exploit that trust and your mission. Kane had nodded, confident in his process, thinking, we're careful. We check credentials rigorously. We verify tax-exempt status. We're protected against casual scams. 2:32 p.m. Michael Stevens, a man in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, stood before them. He presented himself as the Veterans Emergency Relief Fund director. His appearance exuded professional competence, backed by glossy, laminated credentials and an emotional, measured pitch about homeless veterans desperately needing emergency housing. Mr. Kane, your $15,000 donation provides transitional housing for 15 homeless veterans. We are 501c3 certified, IRS approved, BBB accredited. Your generosity literally saves lives. Kane examined the documentation. It looked flawless. The tax-exempt letter displayed the genuine IRS logo, printed on heavy stock paper. The BBB certificate boasted an A+ rating. There were testimonials from grateful veterans, complete with smiling photos. Stevens, your organization is based in Seattle? Kane asked. Yes, sir. We're expanding into Portland. We heard about the Reaper veteran advocacy work. You're exactly the donors we need, committed, focused, and powerful. Kane pulled out his checkbook. $15,000 was a substantial outlay, but the cause, homeless veteran housing, matched the Reaper mission perfectly. In the background, Paul Martinez, 62, continued silently cleaning the polished concrete floors. He was a homeless veteran the Reapers employed for 15 hours a week. A former Army logistics specialist who had lost everything following his late wife's medical bankruptcy. To most members, he was invisible, simply part of the cleaning supplies. Paul's daughter, Sophia, had begged him before, her voice cracking over the phone. Papa, report the scams you've seen on the streets. You've witnessed so many frauds targeting the homeless community. Tell someone in authority. Paul had always refused, swallowing his pride and shame. I'm a homeless man without credibility. Who believes me? I stay silent, stay employed, stay surviving. But Paul recognized Michael Stevens instantly. It was the same man who had run an identical scam in Denver just 6 months ago, though under a different alias, Mark Sullivan. Same practiced pitch. That fraud had stolen $50,000 from a Denver veterans organization before the perpetrator disappeared without a trace. Paul's eyes fixed on the clipboard Stevens held. The heading read Veterans Emergency Relief Fund, but the accompanying logo contained the critical flaw. The word was misspelled, RELEIF, instead of RELIEF, an amateur mistake that proved the entire operation was a fake, a rushed copy of a legitimate effort. A moral calculation flashed through Paul's mind. Asterisk, if I stay silent, the Reapers lose $15,000. If I speak, Stevens might recognize me from Denver, realize I'm a witness, and retaliate. I have nothing, but I still have my survival. He thought of his late wife, Carmen, a schoolteacher who had lived by an uncompromising ethical code. She had taught their children to speak the truth even when silence offered the easier path. Carmen would speak even if it cost everything. Paul decided he would speak before Kane signed that fraudulent check. Kane dipped his pen and began writing. Asterisk, payable to the Order of Veterans Emergency Relief Fund, $15,000. Asterisk. Stevens leaned forward, a small, predatory smile playing on his lips, calculating his exit strategy and the approach to his next victim. Paul dropped his mop, the dull, wet thud echoing sharply in the momentary silence. He walked deliberately to the table, pointed a trembling finger at the clipboard, and spoke with a clarity he hadn't used in 3 years. Don't sign that check. That name is fake. Paul, we're in a meeting. Ghost, one of the Reaper captains, protested, already half rising from his chair, confused by the disruption. Look. Paul ignored him, pointing directly at the logo. Veterans Emergency RELEIF Fund. It's misspelled. RELEIF instead of RELIEF. A real charity wouldn't misspell their own name on official documents. Silence descended, heavy and dangerous. Kane, his expression hardening, picked up the clipboard. Paul was right. RELEIF was clearly visible. Stevens, care to explain this detail? Stevens laughed. A high, nervous sound. Simple typo, Mr. Kane. Printer error. That doesn't invalidate our mission. It does if you're a scammer, Paul continued, his voice now steady. Because 6 months ago you ran an identical scam in Denver. Different name then, Mark Sullivan, but the same emotional pitch, the same fake credentials, and the same misspelling. You stole $50,000 from the Denver Veterans Alliance before the police started investigating. Then you disappeared. Now you're here. New name, same fraud. Stevens's face went immediately pale, the professional veneer cracking to reveal panic. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I was homeless in Denver when you scammed the DVA. I witnessed the investigation. I saw your photo on the police bulletin. You're Mark Sullivan, wanted for charity fraud in Colorado. Stevens bolted, attempting to reach the door. Ghost, reacting instantly, tackled him mid-stride, pinning him to the floor. Not so fast. Detective Sarah Chun, already a speed dial contact for the Reapers after previous minor incidents, arrived within 20 minutes. Kane, seriously? Another fraud attempt? Not our fault, Chun. Criminals just keep targeting us because we have money earmarked for veterans. Chun, this is Michael Stevens, also known as Mark Sullivan. Wanted in Colorado for charity fraud. Paul here recognized him. Chun examined Stevens's portfolio, quickly dismantling the illusion. The fake IRS letter used the wrong font, a subtle mismatch that professional eyes catch instantly. The letterhead format was incorrect. The BBB certificate serial number did not exist in the database. The testimonials were constructed from stock photos purchased online. Mr. Stevens, you're under arrest for attempted fraud, identity theft, and operating a fake charity. But Chun pulled Kane aside, her expression grim. Problem. Stevens is a small fish. He's part of a larger, coordinated fraud network. We've been tracking 13 fake veteran charities operating across 7 states. They're stealing $4 million annually. We need Stevens to flip on his organization. That requires substantial leverage. What leverage? Kane asked. Prove his Denver fraud. Get witness testimony. But the Denver police report states their only witness was a homeless veteran who vanished after the scammer fled. If that witness is Paul, we need him to testify. Kane turned to Paul, the homeless janitor who had just exposed a professional fraud. now suddenly needed as the key witness in an interstate criminal case. Paul, will you testify in federal court? I'm a homeless man. Defense attorneys will destroy my credibility in 5 minutes. You're a veteran who recognized a scammer nobody else, including my supposed due diligence, detected. That's expertise, Paul. That's not vulnerability. Paul, seeing the magnitude of the crime, agreed to testify. Detective Chun connected him immediately with Denver investigators, coordinating witness statements, and beginning the process of building the RICO case against the fraud network. However, Stevens, released on a hefty $100,000 bail posted by the network almost immediately, issued a direct threat. You homeless snitch. You think the Reapers protect you? We know where homeless people sleep. We'll find you. Chun added witness intimidation charges, but the damage was done. Stevens's network now knew Paul was the key witness tying them to their past crimes. Kane made a unilateral, protective decision. Paul, you're not homeless anymore. You're moving into the clubhouse, into a secure apartment under protection, until this trial is over. And you're not a janitor anymore. You're our fraud prevention consultant. $3,000 monthly retainer. You'll be teaching us how to identify the subtle scams that target veteran organizations. I'm a 62-year-old homeless man with no formal credentials, Paul protested. You're a 62-year-old veteran who survived on the streets, watching every scam, learning every fraud pattern, developing an expertise no classroom teaches. That's exactly the consultant we need. But Friday morning, day 2, the threats escalated. Paul's daughter, Sophia, called from Sacramento, her voice thin with terror. Papa, someone called me. They said, if you testify against Michael Stevens, they'll target me and the grandkids. Papa, they know where we live. They know the kids' school. I'm terrified. Paul understood the grim calculus. Stevens's sophisticated fraud network was threatening his family. The daughter he barely saw since becoming homeless, the grandchildren, 6 and 9, he had never met. They were collateral damage in the fight against criminals who had perfected intimidation. Sophia begged, Papa, withdraw your testimony, please. I know you're trying to do the right thing, but not at my children's expense. Paul faced an impossible choice. Testify and endanger the grandchildren he had never been able to protect as a failing, homeless grandfather, or withdraw and allow the fraud network to continue stealing millions from unsuspecting veterans. Day 2, Friday evening. Sophia drove from Sacramento to Portland. It was the first time she had seen her father in 3 years, since his descent into homelessness. She was intensely protective of her children and furious at the situation Paul had created. Papa, you disappeared 3 years ago after the bankruptcy. Mama's cancer destroyed you financially, and you became homeless, stopped calling, stopped visiting. My kids don't even know their grandfather. And now you're involving yourself in a criminal investigation that is actively endangering them. Sophia, I didn't choose this. You chose to confront that scammer. You could have stayed silent, kept your janitor job, stayed invisible like you've been for 3 years. Paul's voice broke, raw with ancient shame. I've been invisible for 3 years because shame kept me hiding. Your mother died. I lost everything. I couldn't face you and the grandkids as a homeless failure. But Thursday, staying silent meant watching good people get scammed. Carmen taught me that silence in the face of wrong is complicity. I couldn't stay silent. So you chose strangers over your family. I chose truth over cowardice. The same choice Carmen would have made. Sophia's anger dissolved into tears. Don't you dare invoke Mama. She'd want you protecting your grandchildren, not testifying in a fraud case. Your mother would want me teaching those grandchildren that right matters more than safe. That speaking the truth, despite threats, is honor. A grandfather who stayed silent taught them nothing, but a grandfather who stood up taught them everything. Kane, who had been quietly listening to the agonizing conversation, intervened, asking Sophia a blunt question. Why did you stop contact with Paul? Because 3 years ago he became homeless and disappeared, stopped answering my calls. When I finally found him sleeping in a Denver parking lot, he refused help, said, I'm not being a burden to my daughter. He pushed me away, so I stopped trying. I focused on my kids, my life, my grief over losing Mama. Papa became a memory. She looked at Paul, her eyes red. You abandoned us. You said it was pride, not wanting charity. But it was shame. You couldn't face us as a homeless man. So you chose the streets over family. Now you're choosing testimony over the safety of those grandchildren. You keep choosing everything except us. Paul couldn't argue. Sophia was right. Shame had isolated him. Pride had severed the family ties. Homelessness had become a convenient excuse to avoid facing his children as a failure. But Ghost interrupted, his massive frame radiating sincerity. Sophia, your father spotted a fraud in 3 seconds that fooled all of us. A successful business owner, an accountant, and a former federal agent. His homelessness taught him to recognize scams, identify fake credentials, and read people trying to exploit vulnerability. That's not failure. That's expertise. He's not choosing testimony over the grandchildren. He's showing the grandchildren what true integrity looks like. Day 3, Saturday. The case grew larger. The FBI joined the investigation. Stevens's fraud network was confirmed as an interstate operation, a massive RICO case. $4 million stolen from 72 veteran organizations required federal prosecution. The federal prosecutor offered Sophia protection. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Chun, and the FBI will provide security for you and the children during the trial. The fraud network's intimidation is a federal crime, witness tampering, terrorist threats. We take this seriously. How long is the protection? Through the trial, sentencing, and 6 months after. The network will be completely dismantled by then. Sophia considered the terms. Federal protection meant disrupting her children's lives, changing schools temporarily, living under armed guard. All because her homeless father had exposed a spelling error. But she met with the other victims, directors of the 72 veteran organizations who'd lost crucial donations, homeless veterans who had been promised housing that never materialized. Sophia finally understood the scope of the evil. One director told her, his voice heavy, "Your father's testimony is the only way we convict the network leaders. Stevens won't flip without leverage. Your father's Denver witness testimony provides that leverage. Please let him testify." Sophia looked at Paul, the homeless father she had resented, now transformed into a hero for dozens of organizations. "Papa, I'm sorry for abandoning you, for not understanding why you stayed away, for thinking homelessness made you less of a man." Day 4, Sunday. Paul met his grandchildren, Emily, 9, and Diego, 6. It was an awkward, hesitant reunion, filled with blunt questions. "Grandpa, why don't you have a house?" Emily asked. "I lost my house when Grandma got sick. Medical bills cost more than I could afford. I became homeless." "Why didn't you live with us?" "Because I was ashamed. I thought being homeless made me a bad grandfather." "Your grandmother would have told you that was stupid," Emily stated simply. "She was usually right," Paul admitted, a fragile smile forming. "Are you a hero?" Diego asked. "Mama said you stopped bad guys." "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who noticed a spelling error and spoke up." "That's what heroes do," Emily said seriously. "In school, they teach us heroes see problems and help." "You helped." Paul felt the start of tears, the first time in 3 years. His grandchildren were seeing him as a hero, not an embarrassing homeless grandfather. Day 5, Monday. Stevens's defense attorney offered a desperate deal. Paul withdraws the Denver testimony. Stevens pleads to minor charges, serves 2 years, and the massive organization avoids RICO prosecution. In exchange, Paul receives $25,000, signs an NDA, and relocates quietly. But Tuesday morning, the fraud network escalated the attack. An anonymous tip called Child Protective Services, falsely claiming Sophia was a neglectful mother, triggering an investigation that terrified her. The CPS caseworker, though confirming the report was clearly false and designed only to harass, stated, "We're legally required to investigate, Mrs. Martinez. Whoever made this report is targeting your family specifically." Sophia broke down, hysterical. "Papa, they're trying to take my children. I can't do this. Please withdraw your testimony. My kids matter more than this fraud case." Paul held his daughter, understanding completely. His courage was costing her everything. His testimony endangered the grandchildren. His integrity was destroying the family he had already abandoned through shame. Paul told the federal prosecutor, "I'm withdrawing my testimony. My grandchildren's safety matters more than your prosecution. Mr. Martinez, if you withdraw, Stevens walks, the network continues operating, 72 organizations get no justice. More veterans get scammed. I understand, but I can't sacrifice grandchildren I've barely known to save strangers." Sophia, present for the conversation, pulled out a letter she had never shown her father, written by Carmen 2 weeks before cancer killed her. It was a sealed envelope, marked * for Paul, if he ever loses his way. "Papa, Mama made me promise that if you ever faced a choice between the right thing and the easy thing, I'd give you this. Read it." Paul opened the letter with shaking hands, seeing Carmen's familiar script, a message from the grave. "My beloved Paul, if you're reading this, you're facing a difficult choice. Knowing you're thinking about shame, about failure, about protecting family by staying small. But Paul, I didn't marry a small man. I married a veteran who served his country despite fear, who raised children, teaching them integrity matters, who held my hand through cancer even when we lost everything. You're not small. You're not a failure. And protection isn't the same as hiding. Our grandchildren need a grandfather who shows them courage, not a grandfather who teaches them silence in the face of wrong. Be brave, mi amor. Be the man I fell in love with. Show Sophia and the babies what Carmen's husband looks like when the world needs him. I love you always, Carmen." Paul read the letter 3 times, tears falling onto Carmen's words. "She wrote this knowing I'd face exactly this choice. Mama knew you," Sophia said quietly. "Knew your first instinct is always to protect family by withdrawing. But Papa, withdrawing doesn't protect us. The fraud network still knows we exist. They'll target the next witness's family. Silence doesn't create safety. It enables predators. But the CPS investigation, the threats are federal crimes, Paul. The FBI is prosecuting them. Papa, I was wrong Wednesday. I thought withdrawing would protect my kids." Ghost stepped forward. "Predators target families to silence witnesses. If it works, they do it forever. If it fails, if witnesses testify anyway, predators learn intimidation is ineffective. Papa, be the witness who teaches them intimidation fails." Kane's voice was firm, offering a promise only a biker club with resources could make. "Paul, the Reapers will protect Sophia and the kids during the trial. Full security, 24/7. We're making them the hardest targets in California. You testify. We guard. Your family stays safe." Paul looked at Carmen's letter, at Sophia's determined face, at Ghost and Kane promising uncompromising protection. "I testify. For Carmen. For Emily and Diego. For the 72 organizations. For the homeless veterans promised housing that was fraud. I testify." At the federal courthouse, Paul testified for 4 hours about the Denver fraud. His identity pattern recognition was stark and simple. "I was homeless in Denver when Stevens, then calling himself Mark Sullivan, ran an identical scam, claiming to operate Rocky Mountain Veterans Relief, soliciting donations, and disappearing with $50,000. I witnessed the police investigation, saw his photo on the bulletin, and memorized his face. Thursday at the Reaper Clubhouse, I recognized him immediately. The spelling error in the fake logo confirmed it, the same amateur mistake he'd made in Denver." Stevens's attorney attacked Paul's character and motive. "Mr. Martinez, you're a homeless man with financial desperation. Are you testifying here for reward money? There is no reward money. I'm testifying because silence enables fraud. I've been silent for 3 years, homeless, ashamed, invisible. Thursday, I chose visibility. I chose speaking the truth. I chose showing my grandchildren that a homeless grandfather can be a hero, too." The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Stevens and 12 network co-conspirators were convicted. RICO charges were upheld. $4 million in restitution was ordered. But leaving the courthouse, Stevens's network leader, identified as Robert Chun, the mastermind of the entire operation, confronted Paul directly. "You homeless snitch destroyed my organization. We had a perfect system scamming veteran charities. Nobody suspected us. Then you spotted a spelling error. You're dead." Federal marshals immediately arrested Chun, adding additional charges for direct threat, witness intimidation, and terrorist threatening. But Chun smiled coldly. "I'm out on bail tomorrow. Your grandchildren, they won't have a grandfather protecting them forever. We're patient." Sophia instinctively grabbed Emily and Diego protectively, understanding with chilling certainty. Testifying had permanently marked their entire family. But Emily, 9 years old, spoke clearly, looking directly at the arrested mastermind. "Mr. Chun, my grandpa is a hero. Heroes don't hide from bullies, and neither do I." 1 year later, the Reaper clubhouse smelled of fresh paint mixing with coffee brewing for the weekly fraud prevention training session. Afternoon light streamed through the windows of the small apartment Paul now lived in, located directly above the clubhouse. On the teaching table were spread out authentic charity certificates beside fake documents. Paul held up Stevens's fraudulent Clipboard logo next to an authentic IRS exemption letter, showing the trainees subtle differences. "Look at the font. The fake uses Times New Roman, sloppy, and common. The authentic uses Arial, precise, and standardized. Look at the spacing. The fake has irregular margins. Look at the details. The fake misspells its own organization name. These are the tells scammers leave because they're rushing to the next victim." 27 homeless veterans attended the training. This was part of Paul's consulting work, teaching street survival expertise to protect vulnerable populations from predators. Sophia attended with Emily and Diego. The children watched their grandfather transform from a figure of homeless shame into a respected, essential consultant. This was a teaching moment more powerful than any lecture about integrity. Diego raised his hand. "Grandpa, why do bad people target homeless people?" Paul knelt to his grandson's eye level, his hands steady on the boy's shoulders. "Because bad people think homeless people are invisible. They think nobody will believe us. They think we don't matter. But Diego, I mattered when I spotted that spelling error. I mattered when I testified. Homeless people matter. And teaching others to see us, to value us, that's how we stop bad people." The federal prosecution of Stevens's network triggered nationwide reforms. The IRS created a specialized fraud detection database tracking fake charity patterns. The BBB implemented enhanced verification protocols preventing credential fraud. The FBI established a veteran charity protection unit. Paul consulted monthly, earning a $5,000 fee. All 72 defrauded organizations received full restitution from seized assets. The Martinez Protocol was implemented nationally, training homeless veterans as fraud spotters, employing more than 200 formerly homeless vets as community safety monitors. Proving that homelessness did not invalidate expertise, it created it. Paul became the state consultant on charity fraud, securing a $6,000 monthly income, the apartment above the clubhouse, healthcare through the Reaper employee program, and the financial security Carmen had always wanted for him. Sophia relocated to Portland, taking a teaching job, moving closer to her father, rebuilding the relationship that 3 years of shame had broken. Emily and Diego visited their grandfather weekly, learning about fraud prevention, understanding homelessness as a circumstance, not a character flaw. They saw a role model in the man Sophia had once resented. Kane redirected the $15,000 Paul had saved from the scam, creating the Paul Martinez Homeless Veterans Fund, which provided emergency housing, job training, and fraud prevention education to 50-plus homeless veterans annually. 1 year after stopping the fraud, Paul, 63, celebrated his first Christmas with family in 4 years. Sophia, Emily, Diego, Ghost, Kane, and the Reaper members who had become his chosen family. Emily presented a handmade card. "Grandpa Paul, our hero. You stopped the bad guys. You're brave. I love you." Diego added, "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to see spelling errors like you." Paul held the grandchildren Carmen never met, the family he'd abandoned through shame, and the chosen family who had valued him when his blood family couldn't. Sophia spoke at a small ceremony later that evening. "Papa, 3 years ago you disappeared into homelessness, thinking you were protecting us from your shame. But you taught us a better lesson. Courage isn't avoiding hard things. It's facing them, speaking the truth. You showed my children that a homeless grandfather who spots fraud and testifies despite threats is exactly the hero they need. 3 years later, Paul's watch program expanded. 500 homeless veterans were employed as fraud prevention monitors nationwide, identifying $12 million in attempted scams annually, proving that the street expertise was valued by federal agencies. Paul, 65, trained over 3,000 veterans in fraud recognition, pattern identification, and credential verification, protecting communities from predators targeting vulnerable populations. Stevens's network conviction led to 147 similar prosecutions, $28 million recovered, and systemic reforms protecting veteran charities nationwide. Emily, now 12, wrote a school essay, My Hero Grandfather, How a Homeless Veteran Stopped Criminals, winning the state competition and sharing Paul's story with thousands. A reporter asked Paul, You were a homeless janitor. Today you're a federal consultant. What changed? Paul answered, I pointed at a misspelled word and chose visibility over silence. For 3 years, I stayed invisible, ashamed, hiding, teaching my grandchildren nothing. Then I saw a scam targeting the veterans who had helped me. I spotted a spelling error proving the fraud and spoke the truth despite the fear of retaliation. Sometimes, homeless men see the scams that professional credentials conceal. And sometimes, spelling errors expose the frauds that elaborate charity certificates hide. And sometimes, choosing to matter, refusing the invisibility society imposes, speaking when silence is easier, changes everything. The broken, defeated figure who had once been a homeless grandfather finally stepped into the light, transforming himself into the hero his young grandchildren, Emily and Diego, deserved to see. Carmen's last, treasured letter, the one he carried everywhere, held the simple, stark instruction, show them courage. After years of hiding and self-pity, I finally did what she asked. I did it imperfectly. I offered my story with awkward pauses, undeniable vulnerability, and perhaps even a glaring spelling error on the official paperwork. But I gave my testimony freely, openly acknowledging the years lost, refusing point-blank to let shame hold me captive or dictate the closing chapter of my life. The victory wasn't clean, but it was real. This resolute action, this imperfect resilience, that is the true legacy I pass down. Something worth infinitely more than just 4 walls and stable housing. This flawed but fighting man is the grandfather Emily and Diego needed all along. A living proof that starting over is always possible. And as the gentle swell of music rises in the background, I recognize this man finally. The determined, imperfect man Carmen once saw, the man she truly fell in love with.